to look at the comments because sometimes people might probably have questions and all that.
Mm-hmm. And the questions are gonna pull up on here, right?
Yes.
The microphone is kind of in the way of the screen. Do we shift this microphone over?
The ring is yours. That mic is for the live call.
Got it. Okay.
The ring is yours. Speakers is. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When you guys take charge, what we're gonna do?
And the questions that come from Facebook Live, you guys pick which ones we're gonna answer.
I usually try to answer the ones that when they come when they see them, so I try to address them.
Not a problem.
Just lost Robert's drop.
The one that I did?
I have a whole folder for all these drops. Everybody's dropped it. It's lost. Put in one of these folders by mistake. Might be this one.
So it's gonna be what's gonna be like the highlight or the headline of the like.
Well, we have recorded your opening, so I'm gonna try to start off. I'm trying to find your drops. I just put it into another folder by mistake. I can't find it.
So I mean, like after the opening, like how I'm gonna like address it, like.
You can introduce Dylan. You know, tell what we're doing. Matter of fact, I'll give you this.
So his name is pronounced Jihad. Jihad Rose. Again, you are the
Deputy Director of Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Deputy Director of Outreach.
I'm gonna like this. I might not be able to remember.
Well, then you'll have him, right? He'll just say what he is, and then because we don't know what that is, right? We'll be like, yo, so tell us what that is.
Not a problem.
Does that mean you're also a police officer, or no? You work just with the
CCRB.
Okay.
Right. So within the CCRB, we're one of the departments that make sure that the public is educated about what the CCRB does.
None of us are cops either, so
They just brought me down just a little. I'm like, thank the Lord.
yeah. Right, because you had no idea. Right, yeah, no. The cops ain't setting you up. Nah. Yeah, none of us are cops.
I appreciate that.
You know this program on public access called Community Cop?
Mm-hmm. Have I heard of it? I haven't heard of it.
No. It's the program. It's the black organization. Mm-hmm. They're for the people. So
got it.
Every Tuesday on coming in public access.
Mm-hmm. I'll see if I can take a listen to it. I know I walked into a precinct council meeting one time. The guy walked in regular clothes. Looked like he just came off of work, and then all I saw was a gun on his hip. I'm like, he's one of them.
Right, for sure.
So you never know at this point. I don't assume anymore.
For sure.
Whose song is it? What's going on, Randy, Tamika, Michael, Joshua, Guy, how y'all fellas doing today? And ladies. What up, Billy?
Okay, now which one is the rocks?
Today almost feel like a Saturday. It doesn't. It really doesn't. Here we go. What up, nephew? What up? Right. I got something special and different going on today. What up, Angel?
So we ready?
Yes, what up? Don't call your daddy up in here, man. Yeah, that's right. You know, I'm looking forward to that later.
Yeah, headphones, cascades, the wheels. Right, the mic, your headphones right there. Hanging behind the laptop.
You gonna call in and start some trouble today, nephew? Nah, I don't think tonight's a good night for him.
Right to Instagram Live too?
Yes, sir. Everybody speak, mics. Try to speak about 1 inch from the mic, please.
Okay, so right here's fine.
What up, Randall?
Got it, Wizz?
What up, Sarah? What's going on, Miss Diamond?
Facebook here, YouTube here.
What does he start? Have you started the other ones already?
First video.
Amos Angel. What up, Josh?
Press cancel.
Nah, that's somebody else. That's a special guest. You're gonna find out in a minute. That's who he is. Everybody's already asking about you.
It's the time, sure.
Make sure the frame is it.
You know what it is? I think it's the tie with the dreads.
Yeah. That's the suit is definitely.
Oh, thank you.
It's fresh.
I do that to create a balance. Like it's rebel at the top, classy at the bottom. To make sure that we have no balance.
You don't want to kill him too much now.
Yeah, still from the streets.
Everybody's running Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all live. Okay. Radio live.
Make sure the mic's on.
I gotta move that mic. Wizz, could you move that mic in the back? Maybe the Bluetooth. Turn it down, please. Thank you.
I need to get closer to get back into the frame. I'm out of that frame. So like when I move closer to the mic, I come out of that frame. Like this one, I'm good. Do I say more?
Yeah.
You have the phone set up, DNA?
Yes, sir.
My nephew's so wild, man. What up, Timmy?
Have you started?
Yes.
All artists, all musicians, all artists, all musicians. If you're a musician out there,
Randall.
for free radio airplay.
Nice to see you guys. Willie. All right. Now they can go. What up, Ashton? What's going on, Randy, Tamika, Michael, Joshua, Guy, Willie, Randall.
Don't have somebody tell you to send them $100, $200, $500, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 to get your record played. That's a damn scam. So don't fall for a damn scam.
My boy Wizz in the building.
You're a damn fool. So come to DNAradio.net. Submit your music for free. F-R-E-E. Free. F-R-E-E. Free. And we will get your music played for F-R-E-E. Free. So make sure you send us your MP3s, your MP4s to free airplay at free airplay at gmail.com. This is a platform for you to get your music out there and get heard, get the people heard, get you heard, get the world to hear you on DNAradio.net. This is the platform. DNAradio.net. This is the platform. DNAradio.net. Send us your music free airplay at gmail.com.
Yo, what's up? This your boy, DeCosta Fields, all the way from East Atlanta, and I'm hanging out with the DNA show live on DNAradio.net. Be sure to check out my single, Curvin, featuring my boy, Brian Waves. It's the second single off my album, I Know What I'm Doing to Tape. It's on every streaming media platform, so y'all make sure y'all add it to your playlist now. Follow me at DeCosta Fields, and follow the gang at Ryan FMG. Yeah.
Yo, this is the boy Young Keezy from Nigeria. I'm listening to DNA show live on DNAradio.net. Be sure to check out my new EP album titled The Other Me. Now available on the iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all the digital music platforms around the world. Please.
DNAradio.net presents DNA and DNAration.net with Rock, aka Rockman, every Saturday. DNA is a live interactive radio program for our brothers and sisters within the SGL, same gender loving community, for the gay LGBTQ communities. SGL, LGBTQ communities. We are here to help support and uplift our brothers and sisters in the SGL, same gender loving, and DL, download communities. The DNA will always be true to thyself. To be true to yourself takes courage. It requires you to be introspective, sincere, open-minded, and fair. It does not mean that you are inconsiderate or disrespectful of others. It means that you will not let others define you or make decisions for you that you should make for yourself. We are human beings who have a life, not a so-called lifestyle. The DNA is not a radio program that gives away any of our SGL or DL intimate secrets within our community or anything of that nature. So please understand, we are not trying to be so-called superhead tell-all program. Furthermore, DNA is not a gossip type program such as TMZ, Big Six, or Release. The DNA staff team family prays to you in love, peace, and support. More love.
We at DNAradio.net are here to uplift and inspire our listening audience. One of the ways we do this is by having thought-provoking, meaningful conversations.
What up, Andre?
We
Mr. Lewis.
understand and appreciate passionate responses. Therefore, we respectfully ask everyone to be mindful of what you say and how you say it.
What's going on, fellas, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you for coming. You know what this is. We got something special today for BU. I got an interesting gentleman, guest. We got Mr. Jahai Rose here.
Hey, my name is Jahai Rose. I'm the Deputy Director for Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
All right. Basically, we're just going to interview and tell you something special. I was kind of, a little caught off guard, so I didn't read some of the stuff that I got, information about earlier. So just bear with me. But basically, we all know that police officers must follow the right to know and act. There's a website you can learn more at nyc.gov/RTKA. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And there's 4 facts that you have the right to know as far as, All right. All right. So today we have myself, Rockman. We got Mr. Rose here. We got DNA. We got Wizz here, and what should we call him?
Miles Anthony.
All right, we got a very special guest, Mr. Anthony here. So definitely, let's get this ball started. You want to hit it off?
Sure. So, Mr. Rose, I guess you gave your title, and so tell us a bit about your title, what it is that you do, and also what it is that the CCRB actually does for the community worldwide, because I'm sure that this organization isn't just for New York, there are different organizations around the country that are similar to this, that people do. So just explain what it is that you do and your role in it.
So the Civilian Complaint Review Board is a city agency where, separate and apart from the New York City Police Department, our responsibility is to investigate, mediate, and in some cases prosecute police misconduct. The agency does our investigations in a non-biased and non-partial fashion, where we're really just trying to find the truth of the matter when individuals make complaints about police misconduct. We have 4 categories of jurisdiction that the agency is responsible for investigating. We use an acronym called FADO to remember it. So it's F, which stands for force. That's force that's unnecessary and excessive, which could look like police officers punching, kicking, slapping someone, using an impact weapon like a baton or taser, or a police officer. Even if the officer doesn't discharge their weapon, simply them drawing the weapon unnecessarily is something that may be subject to an investigation. We also have abuse of authority, which could look like police officers stopping someone for no justifiable reason, refusing to give their name and badge number, despite the fact that the individual is entitled to know if that the officer is in fact an officer once they've revealed that authority, that police-like authority. If police officers are threatening to call ICE on an individual for one reason or another, the separate jurisdictions between the federal government and the city government are very clear. ICE executes federal warrants. The New York City Police Department and the City of New York has made it abundantly clear that that's not something that the City of New York is going to engage in regarding our law enforcement officers. The D in FADO stands for discourtesy. So for police officers using foul and vulgar language and or using discourteous gestures like giving someone the finger, we have an ability to investigate those claims as well. And last but not least, definitely not least, officers using offensive language. So if an officer calls someone out of their name, such as the N-word, using racial epithets, using terminologies that inappropriately describe someone's race, religion, sexual orientation, perceived identity, perceived gender identity, and or perceived disability, then we have an ability to investigate all of those claims. Through that entire process, the outreach unit's responsibility is to make sure that the general public is aware of the services that the CCRB provides, and we try to reach as many people as possible.
Well, based upon what FADO stands for, y'all should be busy as all get out because
definitely.
But and everything should be newsworthy just based on that alone. Because I'm sure just even everyone sitting in this room could say, well, dang, I could have went to the CCRB, from the time I was like 10 years old, if you was all that, whatever. But you know what I'm saying? It's just, the experience that we have as, everyone in their black males, with the New York City Police Department, just in general. But there was one thing that you said that rung out to me. You said that you're independent. What does that exactly mean?
So back in the 1950s, when the Civilian Complaint Review Board was technically structured, it was really a part of the New York City Police Department, kind of like how the Internal Affairs Bureau is. In 1993, because of a riot that took place in Upper Manhattan, there was a separation. Mayor David Dinkins realized that, people may not necessarily feel comfortable with police officers investigating other police officers, so then it became separate. So now the CCRB is its own individual agency, and the New York City Police Department is a separate agency. So we don't get our budget from the New York City Police Department, which means they don't have any influence regarding how we conduct our investigations. The investigators are not New York City police officers. Our agency is civilian driven and civilian run. It's the civilian oversight over the New York City Police Department.
So basically, and everybody else feel free to chime in. So basically, the New York City Police Department does not write your check. Who does write your check?
That's correct. The City of New York writes a check for
the City of New York, meaning the mayor department. Yes. And all that kind of stuff.
Correct.
Okay, that's cool. So how are you appointed? Like, how are you? Because these aren't things that you're elected officials or anything like that. How does it go about you guys being appointed?
So the CCRB has a 13-member board. So you have 5 members of the board that are appointed by the New York City mayor. So there could have been some that were appointed by the previous mayor, the next mayor, but the office of the mayor has 5 appointees. Then the New York City Council appoints 5 members to the board. Then you have 3 members of the board that are actually appointed by the commissioner of the New York City Police Department. And that structure allows for balance between those conversations that are had, because they're the ones that actually verify if cases are what we consider substantiated. So that, which means that the case was verified that the police officer did commit misconduct, unsubstantiated, which means that there's not clear enough evidence to verify one way or the other. Unfounded, which could mean that the evidence shows that the altercation did not take place or didn't take place the way that the complainant said it did, and or exonerated. Everything we do investigatory wise, is weighed against the New York City Police Patrol Guide. So when we make a determination, it's not, did this make this individual feel good? Was the individual happy with the interaction? It's, was this officer doing their job appropriately? And that's laid out in the Police Patrol Guide. So when these individual board members meet, they do a 3-member panel. And with that 3-member panel, they're the ones making these decisions. So you want to make sure that that board is balanced. So you have none of these other 10 members of the board, aside from those 3 that are appointed by the mayor, are allowed to have any police department experience at all. So those are the only 3 members that are allowed to have walked in the shoes of a police officer prior to being appointed to the board.
So 5 by the mayor, 5 by
the city council,
and 3 by
the police
commissioner. So, tell me, how is that independent? If just previously you just said that it's the mayors that write your check, that organization, but then it's the mayor that appoints 5 people. So I'm actually kind of confused a little bit on how it's actually independent.
I was going to ask that question.
So we're independent of the police department, not independent of the city of New York. So every agency within the city of New York answers to the New York City mayor. Okay. So the police department has to answer to the mayor, DOT answers to the mayor. Us being a separate entity from the NYPD just means we're not paid by the NYPD specifically.
Right.
So we do have to work. We have to work with the NYPD because their officers are the ones that are being under investigation. So they have to compel them to come in and take part in the investigation. Hey, we need your statement. We need to have a conversation with you regarding what took place. So you can't be, we still have to make sure we go through a city process because we are in fact a city agency. A lot of times we get confused with like a nonprofit organization, but we are in fact still a city agency. So the mayor has to have some say so regarding what our agency does.
So as far as you say civilian or, you know, people in the public could be, like, how does one get appointed? How would the mayor go about to, if anybody wants to be a part of that? Like,
that's a conversation maybe a little above my pay grade regarding their selection process. It's direct appointment. It's a direct appointment. So if you get attention if you get some type of or some level of attention to the mayor's office saying, hey, I would love to be a part of the CCRB. This is my resume. When the next term is up, I want to make sure that I'm considered. Then that will be the process. But that's something that's way above, outreach's process.
Again, calls live. If you have any questions right now, 917-727-8020. Again, that number is 917-727-8020. Remember, yes. BU is a dialogue, not a monologue. Let us hear your live inputs and your comments.
Do you have the question for them?
I got a question, right? Why is the community aware of this? And why is the I'm sorry. Why is the community aware of this and outreach and reporting?
So I think the good part about having civilian oversight is that you know about it, right? So if you don't realize that there's a way for you to make a complaint against a New York City police officer, separate from going to the police department and saying, hey, someone did something wrong to me, it's the only way for you to be able to utilize that process. So when we go out there and we tell members of the community that this agency exists, it gives them that outlet that says, you know what, the last thing that happened that I thought was a problem with this New York City police officer, I just sucked it up and took it.
Hello?
I just ate it.
Right,
with that
ahead,
being
Paula.
the case, you now have an outlet.
Hold on. All right, go ahead, Paula.
Am I on the air?
You're live.
Yeah, you're live.
Oh, wonderful. I just tuned in and I heard you guys talking about the so-called independence of the board from the NYPD, and someone just asked about the appointees, and 3 of which are appointed by the police commissioner. So those appointees are not held accountable to the people because the people didn't put them there. Those appointees are held, like the gentleman from the CCRB said, they answer to the mayor, right? So that means the 3 that are on the board that are appointed by the police commissioner must answer to whom? The police commissioner. So if you have someone on the board that must answer to the police commissioner, that is not an independent agency. And my understanding is that when you guys prosecute officers for misconduct, for egregious instances of misconduct, you guys have what you call APU, Administrative Prosecutorial Unit, And those trials are conducted where, sir?
At one police plaza.
At one police plaza. Okay, so that to me is not independent. And then so after you guys all do investigations and go out and you talk to people and you ask them about their encounter with the police, and you spend all this time and money and energy investigating complaints, and then when you substantiate the complaint and find that there was misconduct, and then if you have a trial at one police plaza, and then you make a recommendation of discipline, who has the final say on the discipline that you recommend? Who would that be, sir?
That's the New York City Police Commissioner.
Okay, so and yet claims to be independent. I just wanted to point that out. I find that very contradictory. For an agency that's supposed to be independent, it seems like a lot of the accountability relies on the police commissioner. We're talking about accountability, not just stats and searching stats and being able to say these many cases we investigated were this, these many cases were that. You know, accountability means holding people accountable, and that there are repercussions, there are, measures put in place. And if you can't hold police accountable, then you're not accountable to the people who pay the taxpayers who write your checks.
Well,
so if you're not accountable to the people,
hold the line.
You're not accountable to us.
Hold the line, caller, because that's actually a great point. If if the final say is by the New York City Police Department, and how does that make you? Yeah, the commissioner. How does that make you independent? And because we all know who Patrick Lynch is, we all know who everybody is, and he's a very outspoken person. How does that make you independent of and actually speaking for the people, and that sort of thing, if that's what makes the final call.
Right. So our agency's ability to investigate is a thing that's most independent. So our investigations are not conducted by New York City police officers. Regarding the final determination, the New York City Charter designates that only the commissioner is allowed to make disciplinary and implement disciplinary action for a New York City police officer.
Really?
Right. So the charter states that. So we have to work within the constraints of the charter because that's how we were created. So that being the case, our independence is that when we're doing an investigation, that an individual with a badge or also someone called a member of service is not in the midst of that investigation. Whether they're in favor of or not in favor of, we're not working with New York City police officers that we are then investigating. So that's the independence.
Except for the 3 people who are appointed by.
Right, but those are former members of the New York City Police Department. And when they do their board panel, it's a 3-member board. When they do their board panel, it's 1 police commissioner designee and 1 member of the board that is appointed by the mayor and 1 member of the board that's appointed by the New York City Council. So it's not as though at any point there is a majority vote from the members that used to be New York City police officers.
True, but let me interject in saying that the saying is once a cop always a cop, right?
Understood.
So it's kind of one of those situations where how does the community are able to trust that? Because you have people like, and I will call his name 1,000 times, Patty Lynch.
Hold on. When he says Patty Lynch is only a police officer, no more than that.
He's the police department. He's the Police Benevolence Association's
president. But as far as a paycheck from New York City, he's a police officer. He's not a lieutenant. He's not a sergeant. He's not a captain.
Yeah,
he's only a PO police officer, and he's the president of the PBA, the Patrolman
Benevolence Association.
Right. So he's only a police officer. There's no need to fear Patty Lynch.
No, but it's not about fearing, and that's not where I was going with that.
No, it's not about
no, for sure. But once a police officer, always a police officer. So I guess I'm just I can't make the disconnection of because Pat Lynch could be the person who ultimately gets appointed to the CCRB at some point along down the line, right? And if you have a person who, like Patrick Lynch, who was very vocal about the Pantaleo case, he was very vocal about that. And I commend, to a certain extent, the police commissioner, O'Neill is his
Yes.
name? Yeah, I commend him for taking the stance as he did, and even during his press conference, saying what it is that he said, as far as like, he knows cops are gonna hate him and all that kind of stuff. I definitely give that respect, but I guess just to the caller's point, you know, and also being held at one police plaza,
Right.
you know, it's almost like you're walking into like the setup. Like, you
Understood.
know what I'm saying?
Understood.
It's kind of like, yo, I'm not going to hell, just for a lack of a better terminology. I'm not really great at these. I'm not going to hell, but I'm going to the devil's lair to have my trial. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of an interesting, you know, Rock, what do you say to that? Or?
I couldn't agree more. I in fact, I couldn't have even had put in order the way you did.
Caller, are you still there? Is the caller still there?
I am still there, and I had one more. I heard him say that, you know, it's a 3-panel subcommittee when you guys are weighing in on these cases, when the board members are weighing in on cases, and, you know, you have, you know, a former law enforcement person part of that three-member board panel. My question is, how many times has the CCRB ever made a recommendation of termination? I would love to know how many times has this impartial, independent board ever recommended firing an officer of the NYPD? And I would also like to know, I'm just going to get my questions out there. Why is it that East New York continues forever to remain the district with the highest number of CCRBs? What is the CCRB? Does the CCRB know this? And what have you done to deal with this? Why is it that every single year you have a little widget on your page that goes back to 2006? So and I know East New York has, the 75th precinct has had issues historically, but you start your widget at the year of 2006. From 2006 to today, the 75th precinct leads in the highest number of CCRBs. Why is that? And what is the CCRB doing about it?
Well, the only thing to answer to is I can't say why, only because with more police activity, you're likely to have, you know, more complaints of police misconduct because more people are having interactions with police officers. So it just may be that police officers are interacting with the public more, and the public may just be aware that they can make complaints. The more people are aware of the process, then they may utilize it. Our agency is responsible for independently and non-biasedly investigating the complaints that are made to the agency, or in some cases, maybe even mediating them in the event that it falls within the category of mediation. So that's the only thing that I could say our agency would be able to do. In addition to, when we do our board meetings are held in the 75, the 73rd precincts. Now, those board meetings are our opportunity to have a conversation with the public regarding police and community relations.
You want the public to come into the precinct?
No, I didn't say the precinct. I didn't say it was held in the precinct.
No, caller. No, they said that the board would be like, the meeting would be held within that district.
Correct.
The
Yes.
7-5 and the 7-3, not the
precinct house,
not the precinct,
but in that
house,
area.
That would be insane.
Right. So I don't agree.
Well, how many complaints would it take for the board to actually show up in the community? How many complaints would it take?
It just needs to be more than the other areas. So I would say the top 3 would be the precincts that we would then, the precinct areas that we would then go in and find a location in that community to have a meeting. So it just needs to be top 3.
Is there a minimum in terms of like 3 people can call?
No, so it has to be, so let's say only 10 complaints were gathered and one neighborhood had 5 or more, then, and the rest of them clearly would be underneath that. So the 5 or more would be the area that we'd go to have our board meeting.
Five complaints.
For the example. So it just needs to be, right, exactly. So whether the majority of the complaints are coming from, we try to do our board meetings in that community.
So what's the average in terms of complaints you guys get in the last 5 years? What's the average?
So for total?
Yes.
I want to say so far I've seen between 3 and 5,000 over the past 5 years. So I would say this past year we ended out the year with 4,700 complaints citywide.
So rounded off to 5,000 complaints in a city of 9 million, just getting round numbers, right?
Yes.
So how many of those cops out of those 5,000 complaints were thrown off the force?
Or disciplined in some strict fashion or manner?
What I can't say for a specific number, I would say in the percentage where the CCRB actually recommends discipline, I would say about 86% of the time, the commissioner, be it the previous commissioner or the current commissioner, goes with that. Now, what the difference is that it's not that the commissioner is going with exactly what we said. So let's say we say suspension, the police commissioner may say, you know what, they may just need to be retrained. So under that circumstance, it still would be discipline.
Retrained with pay.
It could be retrained with pay. Yeah.
And sometimes they'll lose a week of vacation.
So it'll be vacation days that they may lose, or it could be, like I said, it could be that they want the commanding officer to say, hey, you did something wrong, don't do it again, you're on the radar. Or it could be anywhere up to termination. So anywhere in between, they could recommend discipline for.
And on the percentage-wise, in the last 5 years, how many crooked officers were terminated?
I can't use the term crooked.
This is DNA talk.
Right, we have to be as independent and non-biased as possible. Correct. Sure. So I wouldn't be able to say which officers were crooked or not. What I could say is that I wouldn't be able to tell you the stats right now regarding how many officers were fired. And we do have something called 50A, and under 50A, it does limit how we were able to speak about cases within the CCRB.
No, what if an officer gets a certain amount of complaints? Would they do something specifically, like, because there's got to be a reason why, a community could talk specifically about this particular officer, about, like I said, conduct and not being, addressing certain issues, like, the way a police is supposed to. So how do you differentiate between the legitimate claims versus the bogus claims that somebody's just, being belligerent for no reason?
So throughout that investigatory process, we have to verify if the complaint in and of itself actually took place. So the good thing about the recent 2 or 3 years is that now you have body camera footage that may be accessible. You may have witnesses that may have witnessed what took place. So when we go through our investigatory process, we now have to go through the process of interviewing witnesses, pulling footage, getting audios, verifying information that individual complainant gave us in order for us to say, you know what, this actual occurrence happened. Now, when we do that, it has to be a certain level of evidence for us to be able to say, you know what, this actually took place. So, that occurrence, make sure that that's how we keep that process impartial and non-biased, because it's not just you made a complaint, it happened. You made a complaint, we investigated it, did it happen or not?
Right. There's so many, just even the fact that you said the 7.5 and the 7.3, just based on the history of the 7.5, it's
7.5 in Brooklyn.
The 7.5 in Brooklyn. But we were talking about Brooklyn, and the caller's response was, in Brooklyn they have the most complaints or whatever.
East New York to be exact.
East New York to be the history of that. I mean, your whole purpose is about the outreach, and it's just like there's just so much distrust between the community and the police. And that's even when we're talking about like Pantaleo, right? Mm-hmm. People were on edge, didn't think that he was going to lose his job, and right now I think he's fighting for it. But that's the type of thing that we worry about and wonder whether or not the CCRB is actually doing their due diligence. Now, something that has also come to my attention is something called the ECRB. Are you familiar with?
Yes.
Oh, you are familiar with the
yes.
ECRB. Tell me about them. What do you know about that?
To my knowledge, the ECCRB is a group of individuals that is doing an attempt to have the board members elected by the public opposed to being appointed.
Okay, so
that's interesting.
Yeah, what I'm not saying what do you think about that, because obviously that's a competition, right? You know what I mean? But in the sense of having an elected review board, right? An elected review board, people would have to campaign. People would have to campaign to, and then their platform, there wouldn't be such a, I'm not sure how that would be funded at this particular point, but the idea is the campaigning for, you have absolutely no ties to the mayor's office, you have absolutely no ties to the city council, and especially no ties to the police department. Rock, you said that you could see something like that. What do you think about that as far as the ECRB, the elected community civilian review?
Well, this is my first time hearing about any of these, particular organizations. I would say, I think something like, I don't know, should have been started a while ago, and it would be nice, to get more intel of, how this type of, scenario works out. But I don't know. Just hearing about it, I would like to know how can I get involved?
Right, caller, are you still there? Caller, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. So, Yeah, we just brought up the notion of something, and I don't know if you heard, Mr. Rose talk about he called it the EECRB, the Elected Review Board. And, as a caller calling in, having elected officials, what would be your take on that as far as like how, as opposed to the CCRB? Because I just said that basically, there'd be no connection to the mayor's office, the city council, and especially not to the police. What are your views on that?
Well, I think, if the people put them in their elected positions, they would be held accountable to the people, and the people would be able to, meet with them and tell them exactly how they feel and hold them accountable. I would like to
hold them accountable. You mean the police accountable? When you say them,
hold the people, hold the board members accountable.
Gotcha.
Right now, we can't hold board members accountable at the CCRB because we didn't put them there. They're accountable to the people who put them there. Like I said, I would like to know how many times the board has recommended suspension, termination. As we know, because Pantaleo's files were leaked, he had numerous CCRBs, and he was given slaps on the wrist. That information was leaked. It is in Google it. And after his second, he had two abusive stops. One was a street stop, and one was a stop, and they were considered abusive. There's even in the leaks, we saw that he refused someone medical attention, and the board did not substantiate that complaint. It turned out to be by the board an unsubstantiated complaint. But isn't it interesting that he had an unsubstantiated complaint of refusing someone medical attention, and then he goes on to years later refuse to take his hands off of somebody's neck who says 11 times, "I cannot breathe." So this man had a history, and I want to know how many times did the board recommend that he be fired? They probably never maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But we need a board that's accountable to the people, not to the politicians who put them there.
What do you say to that, Mr. Rose? I mean, are you accountable to the people that put you there? Are you accountable to the people? That seems to be some pretty good, points.
So before you answer that, I would never take the side of the NYPD. But in regards to electing people to be on this so-called board, how many of you people out there in radio land, social media land, actually sit down with your congressmen, councilmen, state assemblymen, or state senators? How many of you actually sit in their offices, complain about different issues, landlords, street, whatever? How many of us actually sit down with our elected officials to talk to them about issues? I'm not taking it for the NYPD. Y'all know me. I don't do that. But that's just a thought. In terms of electing people, we, the people, will have to go out there and make sure.
That's a very interesting point, DNA.
We, the people, have to do that. I sound like what's the guy running for president? They call him Uncle Bernie. It sounds like Uncle Bernie. We the people got to do it. So, I'm sorry, go on.
But back to answering that question about being what the caller just said about as far as being accountable.
So I would say in the event, so your mayor is someone that you actually elect. So in the event you're uncomfortable with something or something appointed that the mayor may have chosen, then that is someone that you actually can hold accountable. That mayor has 5 appointees to the board. Your local elected officials are people that you actually have access to, like DNA mentioned, you have access to. So let's say you're uncomfortable with how the board does things. Those are actual elected officials that you can say, you know what, I'm not a fan of your appointees. Maybe we need to do something different. When these appointees are appointed, they're not appointed for life sentences. So that being the case, if you believe that you're someone that may want to be on the board, then that may be a conversation you have with your local elected officials who you actually have the ability to put in office and take out of office. So I would say where that's concerned, there are some people in that process that you can actually hold accountable for that. But the board members themselves have a very specific responsibility. And that responsibility is to make sure that they independently and non-partially make sure that they judge these individual cases and recommend discipline that's going to prevent the officer from repeating the same behavior.
Okay, so how long do the board members actually sit?
It's 3 years.
It's 3 years that they're appointed. So each person on that CCRB is 3 years, and then they can either be reappointed,
Right.
or
someone else could possibly be
leave or
considered.
Be considered.
Right.
Okay.
Is this a volunteer like the community boards? It's a volunteer situation. You guys don't get no pay?
I'm not a board member specifically.
Oh, okay.
Right, but I just work for the agency itself. But this is a volunteer position. Most of the board members may have other commitments that, like, if you read their bios, they'll tell you that some of them have other full-time employment. They do this because they love what they do. They love being able to have an impact on police and community relations.
So how would those people go about getting, like, this caller sounds like a great caller. Like,
yeah, they're very informative. Very informative.
Somebody, how would she go about becoming a member of the CCRB?
Right. So for her to become a member of the board, that might just be a conversation she may need to have with her local elected official and see if that's a name that might be able to be, pushed up the ladder for the most part, for appointment to the board. But that's a conversation she may need to have either with someone from the mayor's office or directly with the, with an elected official, with the city elected official.
With the city elected official. So you're thinking that the elected, so like having, the EECRB, is just something completely different. I don't know. I find that might be a viable solution, or at least something to make the CCRB have second thoughts about how it is that they
it's definitely worth looking in.
Yeah, how they conduct things, because in all honesty, being in New York, I'm New York born and raised, so I go back to Michael Stewart, I go back to Eleanor Bumpers, I go back to Patrick Dorismond, I go back to I could name off thousands of more of, I'm not gonna say thousands, but many more of individuals, men of color specifically, that have been killed by the police. And my point is that the citizens of New York, and I'm sure citizens around the country and around the world, are not usually, or always, especially citizens of color, are not trusting of the New York City Police Department, right? And I'm sure they're trying to build those relationships, to gain that trust back. But I could say one way of building it is not having 3 individuals appointed by the New York City, the police chief and those elected officials. You made an excellent point. The police commissioner. You made an excellent point that the accountability are to the elected officials. So if the mayor isn't doing what he's doing, then that should be a reason why you cast your vote. Like, that should be something. So, and also with the city council and all that kind of stuff, you're casting your vote because you want change done within the CCRB. But once again, like Rock said, that's definitely a viable thing to look into, to have an elected review board. What do you think about that, caller? Are you there?
Before you like to call, now just imagine a mayor like Giuliani. So you can imagine what his appointments were. A bunch of guys from Staten Island.
Well, don't be stereotypical. But
well, come on, let's face it. The audience or the citizenry in Staten Island would not be for Black people, Latino people, or people of color. Just think about it. If a person like Giuliani had the authority and power to appoint individuals to the CCRB, it would be all of his Ku Klux Klan types. DNA's talking once more. Before you go to the call, I have another thing to say. You mentioned, you gave us a timeline in terms of murders by the police. From my research, historically speaking, for historical purposes, most rebellions, I won't call them riots, most inner city urban rebellions were started because of what the cops did to someone. If you go back to the 40s and 50s to the present, because he gave us a nice timeline of Eleanor Bumpers and Michael Stewart, etc. If anyone out there will do some research, most of these New York City, inner city rebellions around the country was all because of what a police officer did somewhere within the Black community to a Black person. For the most part, I would say 99% of the times. Maybe the blackouts might have been a different story, but for the most part, it was police. What do they call it? Police brutality. Thank you. Going to the Black Panthers, that's why the Black Panther Party started because police brutality, according to Bobby E. Seale and Huey P. Newton. That's why they were formed, to crack down and monitor police brutality back in the 60s, which still exists to this day. So one more time, anyone out there in radio land, social media land, do the research to find out most of these inner city rebellions were caused because of police killings and police brutality. One more thing I gotta say, I don't want to cut you off. In regards to the CCRB's budget, do you know what that budget is for the year?
Typically, roughly probably 16 million.
16 million?
Yeah, roughly.
And New York NYPD's budget is how much, like $30 billion compared to 16 million.
It's way higher than ours. Yeah.
I guess there's not much in the budget for, that kind of justice.
Investigations and all that kind of stuff. One more thing, I have one little note here, and I don't want to cut anybody off. Now, the police commissioner, O'Neill, had mentioned that most crimes in New York are committed by 1% of the population. We're going to take a nice round number. Let's say the population of New York City is 9 million. 10% of that would be 900,000 people. 1% would be 9,000 people. So according to the police commissioner, there are 9,000 people
making complaints.
No, not making complaints, but causing havoc to the citizenry of 9 million. 9,000 individuals, not even talking about organized crime. We're not talking about the mafia and all those guys. We're talking about just the punks that walk the streets we live in. 9,000
purse snatchers.
Yeah, 9,000 of those punks are walking our streets, according to the police commissioner O'Neill. Those are his numbers.
I would say in the same respect, when it comes to the amount of complaints that are made, you have to think about exactly how many police officers are in the city of New York. And of the complaints that we're receiving, really it shows that only 10% of officers really even come in contact with the CCRB or have CCRB complaints made against them. I say that to say this is that in this concept of outreach, let's say that number is 100% accurate. All the people that are making complaints now are the people that are supposed to be making complaints. When it comes to the CCRB's ability to be able to say, you know what, we're going to qualify those numbers, say these are recommendations of things that may need to be changed, we're literally talking about, this is what all police officers that are doing something wrong are doing. Outreach allows us to be able to reach as many people as possible, because the number could be higher, the number could stay exactly the same. But nonetheless, if we don't get as many people as possible knowing about what our agency does to be able to effectively make those recommendations that are made, it's going to be difficult. Why? Because you're not really looking at the entire pie. You're looking at a smaller part of it possibly. So our efforts really are to be able to reach people with where they are at as much as possible. So as to the callers mentioned, is that when we have this conversation in the neighborhoods that have high precincts, that have large numbers of complaints, we're going to the public that we believe are saying, you know what, there is something that needs to be changed. And we listen vigorously. The board listens vigorously to what these suggestions are, to what the issues are, and that gets weaved into the conversations that are had regarding the mayor's influence on policing, the city council's influence on policing, and the police commissioner's influence on policing, which is the reason why the composition of the board is the way that it is, because I've never really heard of a board talking about someone's job performance, never having someone have walked in the shoes of that job specifically. And I understand how polarizing policing is, but at the end of the day, if you're a teacher and you're being judged on your job performance as a teacher, it's hard for someone that's never been a teacher to say you're doing a good job or a poor job.
Well, I know as a student,
right,
going through the city schools in New York City, I, as a student at the time, I was able to judge a good teacher versus a bad teacher. So you don't always have to walk in the shoes as a teacher with a degree, just being a student within the Department of Education at the time, was the Board of Education during my era, now it's the Department of Education. You can just judge, my third grade teacher was great, but this fifth grade teacher sucks, but they don't care. All they want is that paycheck every 2 weeks, or however it works in terms of paychecks. So you don't actually have to walk in those shoes and wear that title. You can just live through the experiences of your life.
Now, to that point, would it be helpful to have somebody that's an actual teacher saying, you know what, maybe this individual does just do this for the check, but the way that you control your classroom, this is the way that I would do it. The way that you craft your lesson, this is the way that I would do it. Because as a student, you may not ever have had to craft a lesson in your life. You may have never had to control a classroom full of young people. Why? Because you were in that classroom filled with young people. So that being the case, walking in those shoes of that individual gives you a different perspective on what it means to do your job well, what circumstances are in your control, what circumstances are out of your control, and what parameters in that conversation may be things that could be changed to be able to better effectively do your job, like class sizes. Like the average student may say, this class is large, but a teacher might say, this class is just the right size for me to be able to say what I need to say. And that students might just be talking that because, you know what, when they rose their hand, they weren't the first student to be called on. So all of that being consistent, I think it doesn't necessarily make the board in and of itself an unfair board, because there are some people that have experience in that field of work saying, you know what, I think that you could have did this a little bit different, but I understand why you did what you did. When you have two other members that are saying, as a civilian, maybe they shouldn't have done it at all. And they're outnumbered. And you may believe that, with the three of us inside of this room, you may say, you know what, my experience as a teacher is one thing, but my experience is only as a student. What about yours?
I guess I can say the same thing.
You know what I'm saying? So your experience as an educator.
He lived at what's that fancy place in Long Island?
Oh.
The Hamptons. He comes to the Hamptons. I come
No. Well, I went to school. I went to elementary school in the city, but I finished high school out there in Long Island.
What you do, the Hamptons?
It wasn't that special. I mean, if you want to call being around uppity people, I guess
Well, a few more points I want to make.
Yes.
In regards to the appointments, can you break down that appointment again?
Yeah. So it's a 13-member board. It's 5 that are appointed by the mayor.
5 by the mayor.
5 that are appointed by the city council.
Now we know there are many more members on the city council than just 5.
Right.
Now, who does the appointing? The city council president? How does that work?
So
One for each borough? How does that work?
Right, exactly. So when they get assigned, they're responsible for an individual borough. So Marbury Starley Butts would be the member for the borough of Brooklyn. Nathan Joseph would be responsible for Staten Island.
There are many more city council members in Brooklyn rather than one.
Mm-hmm.
Did Councilman Mrs. Barron, the councilman from Brooklyn, East New York, does he have a say as to who's appointed to the CCRB?
Right, where that's concerned, regarding the intricacy of it, that's above my pay grade. Where that's concerned, I believe it's a collective conversation that's had regarding which members are on the board or not when it comes to the city council. They are in fact the council, so no one speaks in a vacuum. So their responsibility would be to come up with a candidate that there's no real objections to from the other council members.
So is it who you know, what you know, connections, things like that? Is it done? It's got to be. I mean, if you only have 5 from the city council, there's got to be some kind of organization how they pick these people. And we don't know what their political leaning is.
I want to know what the process is too. Yeah.
Right. So what their political leaning is? Are they Fox watchers? Fox News watchers? Are they ultra liberals like myself? So how are these individuals actually picked? But I interrupted you. You were saying 5 from the mayor, 5 from the city council, and
right. So and from the police, and 3 from the police commissioner. And of those 5 board members, the 5 borough, each one of the 5 is responsible for an entire borough. So at least you have a member on the board that's from the Bronx, from Brooklyn, from Queens, from Staten Island, and from Brooklyn.
Well, we have the guy. What's the guy named? Well, the councilman who wears the cowboy hat. What's his name? Diaz Senior.
Yes.
Just because he's from the Bronx doesn't mean he leans towards the middle or the left. He leans towards the conservative, and he should be located in Staten Island. Ruben Diaz Senior. So just because a person comes from one of the inner city boroughs doesn't mean they identify with us.
So they have our best interests in heart and mind.
Exactly. And Diaz is totally ultra liberal. He should be hanging out with George Wallace or Goldwater, I should say. They're both in their graves. But I'm just saying that's the kind of individual they might have picked from the Bronx who's an ultra conservative as opposed to an ultra liberal like myself. And I don't use the word progressive.
Understood.
Ultra liberal.
So this is what I would say. The good thing about the CCRB is the level of transparency that we have. And I would say if you go on the CCRB's website, literally bios of all of the board members are on there. And let's say you find something on that.
Website address is
it's ccrb.nyc.gov.
One more time, please.
ccrb.nyc.gov.
Thank you.
So if you go to the website, the bios of the board members are there. So if you find something that may be questionable, the good thing is that we have meetings every month. We have a meeting in our office once a month, and every other month we have a meeting in the community. So like our next board meeting coming up in the community is actually going to be in Harlem. It's going to be in the Lower East Side at Grant Settlement at 80 Pitt Street. And that may be, so the next board meeting that we're going to be having is going to be in the borough of Manhattan, and is going to be at 80 Pitt Street at the Grant Settlement. And you'd have an ability to come there and voice your opinion. We welcome members of the community. So it's going to be November, so second Wednesday in November. I believe that's November 12th.
Okay.
That's like Veterans Day, isn't it? No, 11th is Veterans Day.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, so what's saying is Veterans Day is normally on a Monday.
So you don't sit on the board yourself?
No.
Your title one more time, please?
I'm the Deputy Director of Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs.
So do any of these individuals report to you about anything? Do you see in their reports like what exactly do you do?
So my responsibility is to ensure that our staff is going, our outreach staff and intergovernmental affairs staff is reaching out to members of the public. So let's say for the sake,
hold on a minute. Reaching out to say it again?
To members of the public.
Now I want you to pick up that flyer, that flyer I gave you. Show the camera, please, the people on social media. Show them up, right side up. Now, that's the flyer. I was hanging, Miles and I just came from a business meeting at the Adam Payton Powell State Office Building in Harlem, and I was just hanging out on 125th Street, and one of the individuals who worked for your organization was passing out one of those flyers. Now, my theory is, it's always my theory, right? These individuals who were passing out the flyers were doing a summer job. It's part of a summer job gig. Young, probably, I would say the ages of 18 to 21 or 17 to 21. They were doing a little summer job gig. And I'm wondering, were these individuals who were passing out these flyers, was that an inside gig that somebody's cousin, grandson, or son actually got that summer job to pass out these flyers? You probably can't answer that. I don't think you lose your job.
I can tell you how to work that out. So for that day, if it was in June, if it was in July that you saw that, that was our day of awareness.
Day of what?
A day of awareness regarding the right to know act. Right, July 22nd. Right, that was our day of awareness. So on our day of awareness, what we did is we took our staff and we reached out to members of the public. So local organizations, I believe, and there was a local cure violence program that worked with us with that, to be honest. And they came with us because they believe in what the right to know act stands for and believe that members of the public should know. So they came and they literally volunteered with us to hand out that information. So they may have seemed young, but that's because they were out of school. And they may have seemed, to some extent, like they didn't specifically work directly for the agency. And that's because our efforts during that day were really to get local community members that believe that people need to be educated on what this law is to be able to get that information out to the public.
Okay, I interrupted you making a point about your organization.
Yep. So just to say that in the conversation regarding transparency, accountability and balance, we want to make sure that we're not saying that police officers should be left out of a conversation regarding how police officers do their job. What we are ensuring is that they're left out of the process regarding investigating that process. So when we're talking about a police officer being alleged of misconduct, the concept is that you don't want officers investigating other officers. But regarding, as an officer, as an officer or being a pre-existing or someone that may have been an officer before, is it wrong to say, I think this officer did their job appropriately, didn't do it appropriately? Should you always keep them out of that conversation? And I don't know if that's a balanced conversation, because I wouldn't want someone that's never, for the most part, had never been an outreach coordinator saying I'm doing outreach incorrectly if you've never done outreach before. Like you said, you know what it feels like for someone to hand you a business card, for someone to hand you information, but do you know what it feels like to organize people to go out and give that information, training someone to make sure that they give that information and deliver it correctly? So I don't specifically understand, I'll say this, I understand why the board structure is the way that it is, because it's difficult to have a balanced conversation without everybody having a say-so. Now, one thing I will say is that the board does not allow for someone that is a current member of the New York City Police Department to then judge another police officer regarding if they did their job appropriately or not. There has to be someone with pre-existing experience, but it cannot be someone that's currently receiving a check from the NYPD as a member of service.
So they're getting a pension check.
Right, as a member, not but as a retiree, but not as a member of service.
So they have empathy and sympathy for other cops.
Understood.
Well, that's always
not say favoritism.
The code of silence and all that stuff.
But then, like I said, it's like me saying, if I'm on a jury and the person being judged is an African American, I can't sit on the jury because I feel for African Americans. You kind of get what I'm saying?
But right,
like
that's
at the end of the
questioning process,
right,
and all that kind of
exactly, which is the reason why there's an investigation. That investigation lays out what took place in the midst of that, in the midst of that interaction, to see if we place the evidence in front of the board members and say, hey, make a determination. Do you believe that this officer did not do it? Do you believe that they were in the rules within the parameters of the police patrol guide or not? And I think in that conversation, the balanced way to have that conversation includes members of the public and members of the New York City Police Department, the way that the structure is. What you don't want is it to be overwhelmingly one side or overwhelmingly the other side. And in this, you do have the balance that says we have some experience and some understanding of the police patrol guide.
See, in theory, all that's beautiful. In fact, the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, in theory, is beautiful. So what you're saying in theory sounds...
It looks good.
Yeah, coochie, peaches and cream. But I'm sure in reality, even by saying something you read off in the drop about how police officers are not supposed to use foul language. Come on.
But that's what he started with today.
But that's a joke. We all know that. It's like, 911's a joke for the public enemy.
the FADO, which
Right.
is the standards that you were talking about.
Right.
But my question to you, is the police guide available online?
Yes, actually. So you could request, so from the CCRB's website, you can request excerpts of the police patrol guide.
Only excerpts
Right.
of the police patrol.
Right, I'm about to get to the other part.
Okay.
So then the remainder of it is available on another city website. So if you put in the NYPD's website. So if you go to the if you look it up, Google it and say New York City Police Patrol Guide, you'll be able to get that information for free.
Well, the reason I asked that question is because, you know, even in like different workplaces, you know, guides are written to the set where there's leeway, where it's for, you know, interpretation, which it just leads me back to the distrust of what it is between the community, the CCRB, and, you know, the police. You know what I mean? Because, you know, the one thing when I brought up the ECRB, right, it was because I think that the CCRB can only make recommendations.
Yes.
And I think the ECRB wants to make binding decisions. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So you guys can make the recommendation, but the police chief or commissioner or whatever, he has the final say.
Right.
So you guys could say, yo, we recommend this guy be fired, and the police chief can say no, which is why we waited that whole day for O'Neill and Pantaleo, and everybody was on eggshells. So that's why I asked that question about the guidelines and all that, because I think the ECRB has a great point in saying making binding decisions instead of just making recommendations.
Understood.
Because,
yeah, I wouldn't be able to speak to that specifically, more so than saying I don't have an opinion where that process is concerned. My main concern when it comes to doing outreach is making sure that the process for oversight, ensuring that the process for oversight is someone that everybody is made specifically aware of, that process is impartial, non-biased, and actually holds individual officers accountable that are substantiated of misconduct. What that process looks like above that, I wouldn't be able to give my opinion on, but as a New Yorker, someone that lives in the city of New York, has lived in East New York. I lived within the 75th precinct for 21 years of my life. And then I moved to Southeast Queens, which
is crazy.
That doesn't have much of a difference in the sense of community dynamic. And I've lived in these types of neighborhoods all my life. I've had interactions with police officers that were favorable and were unfavorable. It just is what it is. That being the case, I'm comfortable with a process that is impartial, non-biased, and making sure that police officers that are not doing the right thing are put on the road to do the right thing.
What's your political leaning?
I don't know if I can even answer that.
It might be too long.
Like nobody tells their political leaning.
I'm ultra liberal and proud of it.
Great.
Okay. Anyway, you mentioned about NYPD, right? Mm-hmm. What's the total amount of police? Let's not. Okay. Mm-hmm. Break it down. NYPD includes. I had this little discussion with someone. It includes police officers. That's the guys in blue, mm-hmm. and it also includes the brown hats, the brownies. The brownies back in there. Mm-hmm. Those are the traffic agents. Okay. Okay. Used to wear brown uniform at one time. Mm-hmm. So the police department includes NYPD cops, mm-hmm. the traffic agents, school safety. Could you give us? I'm just. You know the facts.
Yeah, I believe it. That's pretty much it.
You don't know no more than that?
No, nothing beyond that.
So what's the total number of employees under NYPD's payroll?
I believe it's 36. I believe it's 36,000.
Out of that 36,000, how many of those are actual police officers?
I'm not 100% certain. No.
Okay, and out of that, okay, if you had the number of there, let's say you said 36,000.
I'm sorry. There's also members of the New York City Police Department that don't necessarily carry guns, and those are civilian members of the New York City Police Department as well. So, correct. Yes.
Administrative assistant. Right. Also, the crossing guards too. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have, let's say, and the reason why
traffic cops don't carry guns, do they?
No. Now the reason why. Mm-hmm. They were talking about diversity within NYPD at one time, because NYPD was, for the most part, Irish and Italian. And then they were talking about diversity, says, okay, in terms of inclusiveness, let's include the traffic agents, which are people of color. Let's include the crossing guards, people of color. Let's include the school safety, people of color. So in order to say we have inclusive numbers, they include those individuals in the grand total of NYPD employees, and even some of most of the workers, I believe, who do the.
But they're not a part. But they're not a part of the actual force.
But no, when NYPD said, when NYPD put their chest out and boast, we have 20% minorities, people of color. they're talking about the school crossing guard, traffic agents, school safety, administrative assistants. But when you break it down to the actual police officers who make that good salary, an excellent salary and benefits, and you retire for 20 years.
Yeah, so I'm going to say this, that I wouldn't be able to speak about police department procedures.
Well, you can retire, I believe, for 20 years. I took the test 3 times again, upper 90s, but I always felt the psychological. They couldn't stand my, But in terms of me passing the test 3 times, and always felt the psychological, so be it. Anyway, so if you have 36,000, out of that 36,000, you might have 26,000 actual police officers. And if you break that number down, you'll probably have, out of the 26,000 actual police officers with guns and badges, I would say, from my little research, okay, you might have the majority are Irish. After that, we would have Italians. And then you'll have so-called people of color, Black people, Latinos, Indians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So still to this day, NYPD, who walks around with a gun and a badge, are still primarily Irish cops, which is legendary from back in the day, and you have Italians.
I wouldn't be able to agree with that or disagree with that at all.
You can't confirm or deny, right?
I can't agree.
Anybody out there in Radio Land, do your new Google search, call us up, and let us know on social media what time it is in terms of that, because those are the actual breakdown. When they send us the okie doke, we have great diversity. This is not pointing a finger to you.
Understood.
We have great diversity within NYPD. Not really. It's still primarily Irish and Italian.
But just to interject it, as far as like race, whatever the makeup is, I think even the bottom line is, it's blue versus the community. So I don't care if they're Irish, I don't care if they're Italian, I don't care if they're Black, I don't care if they're Puerto Rican.
You got a badge number.
They are blue. Once they become New York City police officers, they're blue. Period. So just to even piggyback on that, the racial makeup, it's like, I have a saying that, to me, and this isn't for you to respond to, but for me, I said there's no such thing as a good cop. And the reason I say that, I say cops do good deeds. Yes, they definitely do good deeds.
Wait, stop the music, stop the music.
Finish my
point. Turn down his mic.
Let me finish my point.
This is not a good deed. This is their job.
Oh,
this is their job, not a good deed.
Bro, you didn't let me finish my point.
Now you
can't interrupt me and not let me finish my
point. I always lose everybody.
Cops do good deeds, right? But the reason I say that there's no such thing as a good cop is because as long as they're bad cops and people the cops know who the bad cops are, then good cops should be turning in the bad cops, which is why I always say that. Of course, there's no such thing. I always say there's no such thing as a good cop as long as they're bad cops running around, because it even goes to the blue code of silence. And a lot of this is like the blue code of silence, meaning, in the communities there's no snitching, right? But the cops have that same exact code. But the cops want the community to snitch, but they don't snitch on each other. You get what I'm saying? So
I do understand.
That's exactly all I'm saying. Like I said, that's not for you to comment to, because I know I understand your position and where it is that you're coming from at this particular point.
You didn't come here to hear all this. I know you came to promote your organization, which I understand. Sorry if there's too much on you. It's nothing personal to you.
Well, let's say this. I came here to have a conversation about police and community relations and what the CCRB does, and there's no way to have that conversation without an honest dialogue about how the community feels about police and community relations, which is the reason why when we do our outreach is tailored towards people that are not just people that would be for the most part considered woke, right? People that, we want to reach people that are experiencing and have the same level of angst that you may have, or have the same frame of thought about police officers that you may have. So we also do in addition to traditional outreach, like going to community meetings, precinct councils, community boards, and tenant association meetings, and after school programs, we also do CCRB courtside. I came from a CCRB courtside earlier today where we were in Far Rockaway at a basketball, on the basketball court, having a conversation regarding what the Right to Know Act is and how you could identify for police officers engaging in misconduct. We have also done this in local barbershops. We've done this in areas where we believe that the need is necessary. We partner with local organizations to ensure that we're reaching people on the ground, just like the Day of Awareness. With that Day of Awareness, one, we make sure that we reached out to the public to help us to make sure we get the information out. But two, we're talking to the public as they're walking on every day, going to work, moving about their regular day. We're making sure that they're informed. And in that case, hopefully, if someone goes to this process, in addition to an investigatory process, you also have an ability to do a mediation. And with the mediation, you just have a conversation with the officer. The officer could tell their point of view regarding the incident. You could tell yours. And if you're satisfied, then at least at that point, you can understand from a point of view of an officer, or the officer can understand from the point of view of a civilian, that they're not in the midst of, hey, this is my authority, you must now obey my authority. And sometimes there's power in words, right? There's power in just a conversation. Sometimes you learn a lot about the person on the other side of that conversation, and reflectively, you learn a lot about yourself as well. And I think that mediation part is definitely a powerful tool for a citizen that may feel like they were wronged by a police officer, or may have actually been wronged by a police officer, to be able to have a better understanding on both sides of the table.
Colin, I still hear that you're on the phone, and I was wondering if you had anything to interject. I know you just heard a lot within like the last half hour or so, and I was just curious, do you have anything to interject as far as being the community that, you know, he's referring to?
Yeah, I'm curious to know, in his outreach, what are some of the major criticisms that people have of the CCRB? And then he mentioned he did a right to know training where he
well, let's take it one at a time. That was a good question. Let's take it one at a time.
Okay, so what are some of the major criticisms that people have of the CCRB, and do people find the CCRB to be effective when you know, what are their thoughts? Because I've talked to some people and I've gotten, you know, negative feedback, but I'm curious to know if you get that feedback, and how do you address people's concerns, their criticism, how do you address it?
Yes, I would say it's a mixed bag. I would say we get the negative criticism comes from the fact that the police commissioner is in fact making the final determination. I would say that's the largest criticism that I've heard. And beyond that, I will say the 3 members of the board being New York City police officers, because when we're speaking to the public, we're educating them about the CCRB in totality. And the same thing that I just mentioned, I'm open and honest about it. I don't hide information from the public so that they know what to expect when they go through our process. And I would say the other one is that the investigatory process takes long. So you may start an investigatory process today. It may take 90 to 165 days to be completed, and the average person does not want to wait that long for an investigation to be concluded. So I'll say that would be the 3 major criticisms I've heard from the public regarding the CCRB.
Why does it take so long?
Because you have to investigate it holistically. And when it comes to holistically investigating, it means people are involved. So then you may have an individual that says, I'm going to come in and do my one-on-one interview on a Monday. And then they say, you know what, I'm going on vacation. I might not be able to do it until 2 months from now when I'm actually free. Then you may have more than one witness to that situation itself. Then you also have the conversation about identifying the officer if the individual didn't get the officer's badge number. So those individual things cut into the ability to be able to investigate that quickly. And you have that the agency we only have a finite amount of investigators. So with that finite amount of investigators, with roughly 90 investigators.
90 and $16 million budget, only 90 investigators?
Yeah, right. So that was not only, remember, the agency is not totally comprised only of investigators. So there's a lot of other moving parts to that. But yeah, about 90 investigators for the agency. And with that being the case, one investigator is not going to be able to only investigate one case from beginning to end, when maybe you walked in on that investigator having numerous complaints before that complaint came in. So all of those individual things play a role in that case possibly being stretched out a bit. So that being the case, pulling evidence, reviewing body camera footage, and let's say 5 officers were at the scene, you may be reviewing 5 2-hour body camera footage from that one. Those things being consistent, sometimes it does stretch out the amount of time that an investigation may take.
Maximum 120 days? Max?
I can't say max. I can't say max because, like I said, it still depends on people. So if you have 15 people that sat there and watched something happen to someone, you may have to go through the process of identifying, having conversations with 15 different people, and these are official conversations that you're having. So you have to be able to bring them into a room and have that conversation with them on the record. So it could be. I would never put a max on any type of investigation, to be honest.
So the investigators they work in teams of 2?
No. The one investigator for the most part is investigating one complaint by themselves. So they have individual dockets. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they may go out into the public then you may have more than one investigator that might go out to the public to pull information. But for the most part, one investigator is assigned to one case.
Are these 16 investigators former law enforcement?
No, the investigators are not former law enforcement.
What's their background?
So I wouldn't be able to speak to that because I'm not the one that hires the investigators, but they're not from law enforcement.
Caller, you're live. Caller.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that you're hearing some of the same things that I'm feeling, which is the issue about the police commissioner having the final say. And so again, that just to me says that this is not an independent board. And if you have three appointees who were appointed by the police commissioner who are responsible for determining if the case is considered substantiated or not, they can immediately shut down an investigation. They can, if there's one of the board members who says, yes, this sounds like this cop was out of line, or you know what, that's just part of the job. He didn't do anything wrong, and then the case is dead in the water. It's not even substantiated. I just have a problem with that, and I don't find your board to be an independent. I think it's hysterical to claim independence from the NYPD when you have, former cops on the board. And I understand what you're saying about you need people who've been out in the field, but we're talking about people being abused by the NYPD. And we need people to be on the side of, we need people on the board who are really there for the people. The police have all kinds of protections. They have all the protections in the world. And where's the protection for the people? And I would really like to see, as a result of this whole Pantaleo administrative trial fiasco, I really hope that the CCRB will make more recommendations of termination. I mean, use your power. You can't really make binding disciplinary decisions, but recommend termination. Recommend it. And I hope that they do it more now, because Pantaleo should have been fired a long time ago, but nobody probably even recommended it. And that's sad. That's sad. Be accountable to the people. Recommend terminating people. 5,000 civilian complaints, and how many of those complaints, after being substantiated, ever result? Well, it's on your site. 0. None ever resulted in a disciplinary recommendation of termination, and that's crazy to me.
So, caller, would you be so kind to give us your idea of the ideal board you would like to see? Like, say if you were in charge tomorrow, how would you run the board?
Definitely what I want to hear.
Well, if I was in charge.
Well, if you want a minute to think about it,
She was talking. You cut off.
No, I'm saying I'm at a quarter off guard.
The board would have to represent the district, the community, right? So I would want to see people on the board who represent East New York, Brownsville, Bed-Stuy. That's one board member. I want to see a board member who represents Bushwick. I want to see a board reflective of the various neighborhoods and districts of New York City. I want to know who is my board member. I want to know that every month in my district, not on the Lower East Side this month or in Harlem that month, every month in my district, I can go talk to my board member at a community meeting, at a community forum. I get that currently the CCRB has monthly outreach throughout the city. I want to see monthly outreach in my neighborhood every month. I want a board that if they're not being held accountable to the people, they get recalled.
So
I want a board that can met out discipline, not make a recommendation of discipline, can met out binary decisions.
So it sounds
I want a board that works with independent prosecutors want a board that has access to an independent prosecutor that is there for the board when they come into a situation where a cop has acted outside of FADO or FADO, however you said it, and they've done something that's so egregious that it's criminal, that they have an independent prosecutor, not a DA, not somebody they work with on a daily. They're co-workers. DAs and cops are co-workers. I want an independent prosecutor that the board has access to that can prosecute cops who act outside of FADO. That's what I want.
So it almost sounds like the elected review board, you know, it sounds like you might be in favor of something like that, just based upon, I guess, your knowledge and experience about the CCRB. I mean, can you speak to that?
I barely hear you.
I said it sounds like that you are, because my mic was turned down. I said that I think that you it sounds as though you would be in favor of the ECRB and some of the
Is that what the ECRB was?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. It sounds like elected officials might be held accountable, you know, towards, you know, some of the things that you were saying. And I think everything that you said, you know, is justifiable, kind of, you know, be representative of the communities where they're from, and that you'd be able to go into those to your elected official, your elected board member, and have that conversation about the rogue cop, and this is hypothetical, the rogue cop that everybody is complaining about, and to have something, you know, done about that, you know. But and ironically, you know, they were talking about Staten Island. I've been watching this Hulu series on Wu-Tang, and I know that, you know, one of their people were actually, you know, choked out by what they deemed as a rogue cop. You know what I mean? And apparently that cop had been being rogue all the time, and they weren't, you know, he wasn't, you know, handled in a proper way. But if there was an elected official from Staten Island, you know, it might not lead up to the point of somebody getting killed if you have an official who can, that you can go and talk to and actually point the finger at this one particular individual who happens to be the problem. So I'm just saying that I agree with you. Do you have anything to say to that, Mr. Rose, or?
I think that the points are very valid, and I wouldn't be able to take away from someone's vision of an ideal circumstance in the city of New York, especially with a situation that's as polarizing as, you know, policing in our city. We definitely understand how it affects individuals' lives. In our capacity, we have the ability to do what we can do within our capacity based off of the document that gives our agency power. And within that document, we have an ability to operate in the fashion that we have been acting within. And I think that process, we've tried to maintain as much accountability, visibility, and transparency as possible, and trying to make sure that conversation is always an impartial and non-biased conversation. So I would never take away from someone's vision for what the ideal situation is, but we're working within the capacity that we have, and we're trying to make it as ideal as possible.
Sure.
So, Mr. Rose, you mentioned something about 5,000 complaints?
Yeah, roughly. So 47 to be closer to 47 to be exact for last year, for 2018.
Okay, let's take some easy numbers. Okay, let's round it off to 5,000. Let's say out of all NYPD, let's say the actual cops with guns and badges are about 25,000. Nice easy numbers.
Yes.
So if you take 5,000 complaints and there are 5,000 police officers these complaints are going against, that's 20% of the force. 20% of the force is no good for nothing crooked.
Well,
20%.
In all fairness, that lends to the notion that more than one complaint couldn't be filed against the same officer. You can know what I'm saying? So even in that respect, within that year, we're not taking away from the fact that one officer could receive more than one complaint. So that being the case, and our record indicates that roughly about 10 to 11% of officers have CCRB complaints against them because of the exact same notion that some officers are getting multiple complaints.
And what happens to those officers with multiple complaints? Does anything ever happen to them?
Well, the complaints have to be investigated. So you can't call a complaint an actual substantiation until you've engaged in that investigatory process. And that's just like anyone else that gets accused of something, right?
Well, no, football players get accused of touching somebody's booty, doing fan signings, and then automatically the NFL suspends that individual without pay. But when it comes to NYPD, who do 10,000 times much worse things than a football player, they're still on the payroll for 90 days.
I guess you're saying the investigative process isn't really taken serious to really look into it. Like, it's just, you know.
They're laughing in the locker room, say, they got you again? Oh, O'Reilly. Yeah, O'Reilly, you got caught again. Yeah, Bertucci, I got caught again. They're laughing at the CCRB because they know nothing's going to happen.
Well, slap on the wrist.
And you're the deputy commissioner? Deputy commissioner?
No, I'm the deputy director for the outreach and intergovernmental affairs unit. So I'm specifically responsible for that in that capacity. But that being the case, to answer your very direct question, you gave the notion that 20%.
More calls.
Understood. Right. So your notion was that 20% of them are in fact no good, and I wouldn't be able to agree with that, because it's not as though we have every single complaint being specifically substantiated. And because all those complaints aren't specifically substantiated, I just wouldn't be able to agree with that specifically. Now, let's say all 20 of them were, and it shows that all 20% do have engaged in misconduct, then that's a different conversation. But that's not what we've seen so far.
What is that, a call coming in, Rock?
No.
Wizz, you want to help me out with that, Wizz, please? Might have a call coming in on the iPhone. Real quick. Now, do you think that all police officers and all officers under NYPD, you're getting a payroll from New York City, do you think they should all live in New York City? They shouldn't be living in Long Island, upstate Rockland County. They should all live in New York City, since we taxpayers in New York City are paying their salary. They're not getting paid. The Long Island people in Long Island are not paying their salary. Rockland County are not paying their salary. All police officers, in my opinion, should live within the 5 boroughs of New York City.
I wouldn't be able to give my personal opinion on that because of our agency's proximity to the New York City Police Department. I wouldn't be able to give my opinion on that.
Sure. But I think that's a great idea, DNA, as far as like, having people, I know people who have other jobs that they're required, if they took a job in Brooklyn and they're required to live in Brooklyn just because of something that's community based.
Understood.
And most councilmen members have to live in your council, live in the council district.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have any comments in terms of anything?
Right. So one thing I do want to highlight is that as a part of our unit, we want to ensure that as many people are being reached as possible. One of the other criticisms that we have a tendency to get from the public to add on to what the caller asked is that we're not in places that people want us to be in. What I'd say is that the Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs unit is willing to go literally anywhere you want us to go, which is the reason why CCRB Courtside was created, which is the reason why we do our barbershop series, where we're going to barbershops, salons. We go to nail salons if you choose to have us there. And I make this promise to anyone, if you have 10 people that are willing to talk in the parking lot, I'm willing to have that conversation in the parking lot. And so are the outreach coordinators that work within our agency. Invite us, we will be there. If individuals would like to reach our agency, it's outreach@ccrb.nyc.gov. Feel free to send us an email telling us where you would like us to be, and we would love to be able to be there. But my responsibility is to make sure that as many members of the public as possible are aware of what our agency does, have a better understanding of what the Right to Know Act is, and to make sure that we could receive that feedback from the general community that we could bring back to our agency to hopefully provide some better insight regarding the tone of police and community relations citywide.
Could you repeat that email 2 more times?
Okay, so it's outreach, outreach @ccrb.nyc.gov. You can also go directly to our website, notify us that you'd like an outreach presentation, fill out the form, and we'll respond to you and let you know wherever you're considering us doing a presentation. If you want us to cut the presentation from 40 minutes to 10 minutes to 3 minutes, we will do what's necessary to make sure we're in front of the public and speaking to them about what this agency does and how it could be how it could be a tool for members that have experienced misconduct.
Out of the $16 million budget, do you guys have an advertising budget, like the PBA? When they want something done, they go on radio, start advertising something. You guys have an advertising budget as opposed to PSAs?
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen an advertising budget.
Well, the flyer I received that day, somebody paid for the flyer, obviously. Right. So there is a budget for. That's
materials. So you mean when you say advertising, do you mean like on the television or on radio?
Radio, television,
right, so
subways, on the subways, things like that.
No, so I don't think you'll ever see. So the only thing that's available that I've seen the CCRB utilize will be Link NYC. So if we're having a board meeting, we'll use Link NYC, and those are those standalone locations where you could make a phone call or right, exactly, and they give you wireless internet, and you'll see advertisements there. So that's something that we utilize. We have our Twitter account, but beyond that, I haven't seen a CCRB commercial or a CCRB radio plug. And if this radio station would love to plug the CCRB more often, regarding events that we're doing, we would love for you to be able to do that. But if we're invited to a radio station to have a conversation, then we're typically there.
How many radio stations have you guys actually been invited to?
Me personally, I've only been invited to this one.
Oh, okay.
So I believe this
Master Flex from Hot 97 and Power 105. Have you been invited to guys down there? The big boys?
Not to my knowledge. I haven't heard of that happening so far. I know over the past maybe 2 months that our executive director and chair might have been receiving a little bit more press regarding the radio following the Pantaleo trial, or should I say the Pantaleo decision. But aside from that, I haven't seen any much more beyond that. And it'd be like local podcasts that may invite us to have conversations regarding police and community relations.
I think Patty Lynch wants equal time now. He wants to come and get interviewed.
Here?
Yeah, he wants equal time now. So I guess whatever.
Yeah, please send me a calendar invite so I can listen.
Who want you to sit right next to him? We have your commissioner sit right next to Patty. So Miles, now that I have no more questions or comments, do you have any comments to say? Wizz, anybody?
No, I think you're a great spokesperson
Absolutely.
for the CCRB and to getting the message out. I still think that there's a trust issue. As far as like the community. I mean, the caller was prime example about it. You call it independent, but there's still like a trust issue of like, how is it independent? I mean, you made a great case for it, saying you want somebody who has been there before, but at the same time, you don't want somebody who's you want somebody who's unbiased, and that's not necessarily you're not necessarily going to get the person who's unbiased. I mean, when we talked about, the caller said something about Pantaleo should have been fired years ago, and it wouldn't have gotten to the Eric Garner situation, right? But then, as like DNA said, and like you said, it depends on who's mayor, right? So if if Giuliani was mayor just using names or whatever, he could have appointed, the people who were supportive. You know what I'm saying? So there's just like so many dynamics.
Right?
There's so many dynamics and so much to unpack as far as like that we did pretty well as far as like what we got in for tonight or whatever, but there's just so many different layers, and it's just years and years of just non-trust of the community and that sort of thing. But once again, like I said, you did an amazing job being a spokesperson, so I appreciate you coming through, and DNA actually setting this up and having you come through. I think it was excellent. I'm glad that you broke your virginity here on this radio station. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when you go out and be like, the first people that, hit us up was DNAradio.net, and you had us on. So when the powers, and the hots, Hot 97 and Power 105, when they do start calling, you be like, yeah, y'all the second day. You know what I'm saying?
We got them first.
Right, and just like you said, it's kind of like you say, we would gladly, and if we want to give you the plug, we ask that you give this the plug as well when you go out there. So, it just works reciprocal. And, it wasn't hostile. It was very friendly.
Well, DNA was kind of hostile.
Well, you weren't attacked. You know what I mean? And we wanted to have, because in that type of scenario, we don't really get the information out.
Right.
And we don't get to do so. I'm glad that we actually did have the opportunity to converse with you, and I hope you are happy that you got to converse with us as well.
Let me say this. I would say that's what meaningful dialogue is, right? When it comes to meaningful dialogue, I would never say that I would ever want to walk into a conversation where we're all in agreement if we're not genuinely all in agreement. And to the caller's point, to DNA's point, to everybody's point here, the system that we live in is not always going to be perfect. It's not one that we have an immediate ability to be able to walk into and create the second we verify that there's a problem. And in meaningful conversation, hopefully we get towards that space that we could all feel comfortable in, especially with something as polarizing and as impactful as police and community relations. Because no matter how you look at it, police officers they're in our community. They're here for a purpose. The public, they're here to serve the public, and in being here for that reason, that police and community relations is necessary to make sure that our quality of life could be improved. So that being the case, if the conversation is not to some extent hostile, then maybe we're not taking it, you know what I'm saying? We're not taking it seriously.
Yeah, sure.
If you're not asking the difficult questions, maybe we're not taking the conversation seriously enough. Appeasing my feelings, I'm a pretty big guy. Appeasing my feelings would never be something I want somebody to take into consideration when having a conversation that's as important as this. And on behalf of the CCRB, I love having these conversations because I feel like this is a vehicle that can be used to help improve that. In addition to the investigatory process, which is an accountability avenue, I think the mediation process is definitely very important for people just to be able to view each other as not as blue or black or white or Latino or Latina or any of the categories, more so than I'm a person. You are a person. Maybe this, and to outreach, I've been in the community where they're like, you know what, sometimes that officer stopped me and I believe that they were looking for the wrong person. All I really wanted was an apology. I really just wanted that officer to say, you know what, I apologize. They stopped me. They frisked me. I was the wrong person, and they left without offering an apology.
Recent time or the past?
No, I had a conversation about that.
Yeah.
About maybe 3 weeks ago. Right, exactly.
But it didn't happen to you.
No, it didn't happen. I'm not gonna say what happens to me. That specifically didn't happen to me. But right.
We'll do that off mic.
No.
No, but that's what I wanted to address.
Come to the mic, please.
That's what I wanted to address. Okay, as far as you see the cops, I mean, a lot of police officers playing basketball now. You know, they try to be
more community organized.
I'm saying, so as far as that, is that the base of training? I mean, how do the commissioner everybody feels when they see them on the court? You know, with basketball, playing basketball, pickup games. Because there was a complaint one time, I think it happened last week, where 2 cops came over because they heard that there was a disturbance, but only the kids were playing basketball. So rather than anything happening, what happened was they just started. They joined in the pickup game.
Understood.
Well, that was my point. That was my point about saying that there are police officers who do good deeds. Yeah. But I also say that there's no such thing as a good cop because they don't turn in bad cops. So the good deeds is what I was actually speaking to, and them being like, what you're saying is a good deed, for sure.
So how about this, Mr. Rose? How about for every good cop that turns in a dirty cop, they get a $10,000 bonus. Put a bounty on it. Put a bounty.
Can you make that recommendation?
I believe everyone here can make that recommendation to the local elected officials.
We'll call the mayor or city council president.
Right. So I would say to that, I don't know exactly how the police commissioner sees that level of community interaction. I can only speak to what I see when I see a police officer interacting in a way that speaks to an individual as an individual, and they take the consideration to actually holistically assess the situation and to provide a proper approach. Me personally, I would say I like the fact that there's not this knee-jerk reaction to just seeing a very specific type of person in a very specific type of area. And I think it hopefully it improves the way individuals see police officers, because expecting one more visceral or more angry response from every single officer that you run into creates a generalization that might not necessarily be true and might lump officers into a space where they don't necessarily belong in. So that being the case, if that's what the officer did, then, and if that made that individual comfortable with the officer, then.
Well, it was 2 of them, and what happened is they just joined in, and they filmed it.
Right.
Okay. Also, with the whole situation with the cops getting thrown with the water,
got in the water down.
So it's just the energy as far as with the cops that sometimes it might happen that it might be an innocent bystander as far as getting called, and they feel like no, he didn't do it, and the cops don't listen. Because there's a lot of times that people who have been falsely accused.
Right, understood.
As they're standing in the lobby, just waiting for Uber or something, and they probably be like, well, he's loitering. And so some cops be coming, because I've been in a situation where I was in the cab and they pulled the cab over, talking about I felt, that the person was feeling uncomfortable.
You by yourself?
Yeah, I was by myself. Yeah. And then there was another situation that it was a malign. I fit this description of
a person who was robbing cabs. Now, mind you, I didn't have nothing but my ID and the money I had on me. They wanted to take me out the car first before they did that. Point the gun at me.
Wow. Well, you're a black male. If you were a Jewish kid or an Italian kid, an Irish kid, there would be no gun. Hey, O'Reilly. Hey, Bloomberg.
But Wizz doesn't look too threatening. Like
I know, but I'm saying he's a beautiful black man, like all of us are in this room. Just because you have that beautiful black melon in you or the melon in your body, they automatically pull out the gun.
But not only
guns were pulled out on me too.
But then
it
could be like an inspection or when they be doing the stops. Well, I always get pulled over.
You mean like the roadblocks, right?
Yeah.
Like the roadblocks.
I always get pulled up because of my sleepy eyes. They want me to get, and then the thing about it, they want me to get out the car and walk the line. Every time.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's good. They're doing their job to make sure the roads are safe. Nothing against you, Wiz, but that's good. But to pick on the kids in the lobby just hanging out, they live there. We don't have a backyard or a front yard, so their front yard is their lobby. As long as they're not bothering anyone, they're not picking on the old lady trying to snatch her pocketbook, and just hanging out in their lobby, then I have no problem with that. But pulling over people to make sure they're not drunk, that's a good idea. Pull me over 1,000 times, just don't pull out a gun because I'm a beautiful black man. You know what I'm saying?
Well, like you said about that statement earlier, like at least make an apology. Say, hey, look, because it's hard to differentiate who's doing, an injustice to the, community versus, who's just minding their business.
So, and that's what I wanted to speak to is that. So, one, a police officer simply pulling out a weapon that was unnecessary, something that could be investigated, right? In addition to that, in not knowing what information that police officer has, that's what the power of the investigation is, right? So me not knowing that a call came in about somebody 6'1", locks, dark skin, that may have committed a crime in the vicinity that I'm in, could be the difference between me knowing that I actually got stopped for the right reason or for the wrong reason, which is the reason why, as mentioned before, when we talk about independence that the CCRB has, that's one of the things that are kept very independent, is the fact that our investigations are not something that has to be like approved by the NYPD. They don't say, hey, investigate this part, but don't investigate that part. That investigation is something that might be able to be the difference. And when it comes to like the mediation conversation, that mediation conversation could be the difference between you having that conversation with an officer and believing that they stopped you for no reason, and them just explaining to you, I stopped you for the wrong reason, or I stopped you for a justifiable reason, and you know what, I did that, I understand how you took it, I'm sorry. You know what I'm saying?
But there's levels that it can go, because say when they point the gun on me, I'll raise my hand.
Understood.
And then they can be like, oh, I'm resisting arrest or something. Because something like that will startle you, because you don't know. I lost a friend that it was by a rookie cop on Halloween, that he put the gun to the guy's head trying to put the handcuffs off, and it went off. The gun went off, killed him.
Understood.
So
and I would say, but
that happened years ago.
But that's also one of the reasons why something like that can be investigated. Like in the midst of that moment, there's no way for me to be able to tell somebody how to feel in the middle of that moment. When we come out and we do that individual training to tell people, you know what, these are things that could be investigated. One part of that training is maybe how you should respond when these things are happening. Try to remain as calm, cool, collective as possible. Understand how your action is going to impact that. So like you seeing the gun and you in your hand, if you understand that might be a trigger that may say this individual is engaging in a hostile interaction, then that might be something that you may want to avoid doing. In addition to remaining calm no matter how that police officer behaves themselves. When we go out and we tell members of the community this, it's for them to be able to say, you know what, I have this information. I know that there's a process for me to make a complaint about it afterwards. And hopefully I'll be able to walk away from this interaction and make that complaint and try to make sure that the accountability.
My rights behind it.
Understood.
It happened twice. Not only that.
Only twice? You're lucky. It happened like 20 times.
Me and Red. So, and that's before social media and everything.
Right.
So,
before body camera footage.
When that happens, you have the cameras to protect you. Even so, like that, it's like a situation as far as like, okay, like my wife's cousin got killed by a cop, by Peter Nero.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And his name is Timothy Stansford. All right.
I went to school with him.
You went to school with him?
He went to Thomas Jefferson High School, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know what high school.
That was the kid that got killed?
On the roof, yeah, on the roof. Yeah, I went to school with him. I went to school with him.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah,
so he got killed on the roof. And the cop, this guy, that's good.
Understood.
And he didn't lose his job.
Understood. But like I wouldn't be able to speak for what happened during that time period.
But I'm just
but
saying,
I
it's
understand.
like, I guess because he was scared. 'Cause a lot of times these situations, cops are scared to patrol the hood.
That's why that's why they need to live in the community, not in Long Island, not in Rockman County, where else they live, New Jersey. They need to live in the community, and they don't have to fear the people they live with.
And the point well taken. Point well taken.
Either that or like be more community based, get with the things. Like I do like some of the things that some of them doing, trying to do and be a part of the community, to understand the community a little bit better, to know how to help, would you say, serve us better. But there needs to be more of that activity going on.
You said you went to Thomas Jefferson?
Thomas Jefferson High School, yeah.
It's the craziest high school I've ever been in.
It was pretty different when I was there as well. But I would say, I lived in East New York. I went to PS 13. I went to IS 292. Went to Thomas Jefferson. Went to Erasmus Hall. Went to like I'm not like and hopefully that lends to the understanding that I've lived in very different parts of New York City. I've interacted in very different parts of New York City, and that being the case, when it comes to outreach, I understand why it's 100% necessary. Like you mentioned, you didn't know what his rights might have been in that situation. Understanding that sense of how you should react, and that becomes training for yourself, right? It's just like getting into a fight. When you train for a fight, you understand exactly when you get hit here, how you might need to block here, how you might need to approach a situation before, and proactively engage in that so that you reduce the level of harm that comes to you. That's what training is for. So, which is the reason why we are so, and I think that leads to the question before was, why is that important? I think that's why it's important. Because if you don't know that there's a complaint process, if you don't know that there's an investigation, in the midst of a presentation that I did actually in Penn Wortman, in their community center, one of the adults in the room said, "Hey, it's always going to be the officer's word against the individual's word." Yes, but not in the presence of evidence, right? When you have evidence, then that conversation becomes a little bit different. Realizing that now we are in fact looking for evidence to try to verify the truth of that matter could be empowering, and it may change your response from one that may be visceral, that may be violent, that may be more harmful than good for you, to one that's a little bit more responsible to the situation that you're in. I'm not going to raise my hands. I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to make this argument. I'm not going to make this argument. I'm not going to argue here. I'm going to collect the information that I need so we could have a more consistent and more relevant argument there.
That is kind of
smart. At the end of the day, you need to move, right? You need to get away from that situation first.
But Mr. Rhodes, I'm sure we've all seen in this room that white people would say, scream and holler and ready to knock a cop out, and nothing happens to them. Okay. There's no need to shake your head. I'm just calling a spade a spade,
Okay, understood.
But a black person just raises his hand and says, "I give up," or whatever the case is. That's whatever term is used to describe this. When your hands are up, I don't have anything. You still get shot just for raising your hands as if, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot.
Understood.
And we've all seen on social media, white guys are cursing out the cop, banging the police car, and nothing happens to them.
So let me say this, right? I can't speak for any other individual situation. Understood. I can't speak for anybody else's situation besides mine, right? Understanding my dynamic with other members of the community, I then have to understand how I personally am going to respond to other members of the community. In the event I feel like this gentleman sitting next to me is a threat, I then need to understand how to react to this gentleman sitting next to me from my perspective. I can't react from his perspective or your perspective or his perspective, which is the reason why when we do these trainings, you still have to absorb what's best for you as an individual, because only you know how your interactions are with your local police department, because we can't generalize that everybody's interaction is the same from our standpoint. So hopefully with knowing that in advance, an individual will be able to, craft my responses. I understand this thing is problematic. I understand that I may be viewed a little bit more of a threat than somebody else. I need to understand how to carry myself in that situation.
But the same should go for them too. Why don't they get the training to know how to better, articulate themselves around certain individuals in different personality types, so they can tell? Because certain people might have different needs, no different than a teacher could only be effective at being a good teacher if they know how to assess the student's needs based on who they're,
That's also implicit bias training. So the CCRB did recommend that there's more implicit bias training for police officers so that they're not viewing everyone in generalizations.
That's only a recommendation. How about making it mandatory?
Some actually plan and action.
Make it mandatory.
Well, that's still a conversation.
Every 6 months, you go to mandatory, whatever you call it,
Implicit bias training.
Every 6 months. every 6 months.
Right. So, and as I mentioned before, that might be a conversation that you want to have with your local elected officials, because at the end of the day, the people that actually have a little bit more influence regarding setting those individual rules are beyond the CCRB. Those are the people that you actually elect to make those things happen. You know what I'm saying? So that being the case, I wouldn't be able to say beyond the recommendation, we can force officers to engage in implicit bias on a more regular basis. But what I will say is that it was recommended by the CCRB that maybe they should engage in it a little bit more.
Who did you guys recommend it to, the commissioner?
That's a conversation about my pay grade. But when we talk about the police department, we're talking about the police department, like the overall police.
Well, how does it go? I mean, your committee, your board, your council recommend something, and where does it go? That's my question.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. That who they have the direct
you don't know where it goes.
Who they have the direct conversation with, like if they sit with the commissioner in a room, is a question that I can't specifically answer because I'm not in that room.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
What's the procedure?
So it's making the recommendation to the agency.
Is it a phone call? Is it you give it to the birdie, hit pitch, and go take it to? I mean, how is it done? You have to know that. Come on.
Right. So the recommendation is made to the NYPD. I wouldn't be able to say anything beyond that regarding who they're specifically.
So it's like back in caveman days, you write a message on the wall, and hopefully the commissioner walk past the wall, he'll see the message. I mean, if you can't tell me how from your organization sends a message of recommendation, come on, what do we spend 2 hours for?
Because to be honest, do you want me to answer that question honestly?
Please.
All right, so for the most part, we spent this 2 hours trying to have a better understanding of, one, what it means for us to be able to do outreach to members of the community, and understanding what the CCRB specifically does. Regarding the intricacies, the smaller intricacies, there were numerous questions that I couldn't answer directly, because I'm not going to give you information that could then be traced back to saying it was false, not correct, because I don't sit in those rooms when they make those recommendations directly to the agency. You know what I'm saying?
Well, who sit in those rooms?
That may be the chair of the board. So that might be a conversation for the chair of the board, the executive director of the board. The chair of the board is Fred Davey, and the executive director is Jonathan Darsh. Their information, they're on our website, and if you want to know exactly how they transfer that information over, that's a conversation, like I said, that's above my pay grade.
They're appointed by the mayor, those two individuals?
The chair is appointed by the mayor, and the executive director is appointed by the board.
See, this is why we need to get more involved in the community with, the boards, like you said. That makes perfect sense.
But most politicians in New York City, I'll just speak about the black ones, I can't talk about the white ones. Most black politicians, in my opinion, in New York City, aren't worth Jack Dooley's squat. The only ones I'll have praises for is Councilman Barron. She's great, she's excellent, and also Councilman Torres, who's running for Congress up in the Bronx. Those are the only two ones that have backbone, in my opinion. The cocksuckers we have here in Harlem.
The what?
The cocksuckers we have here in Harlem aren't worth, I said it and I didn't take it back, they ain't worth the paycheck they get. None of them. The councilman, the state senator, the assemblyman, they ain't worth dooley squat. The only ones I have respect for is Councilman Barron in Brooklyn and Councilman Torres in the Bronx. And I said, keep talking like this, everybody shuts up real quick. The room got silent out there in radio land, social media land. And everybody's saying DNA's got. Well, go on, Wizz. I'm sorry.
Give them the website again.
So that's ccrb.nyc.gov.
And also, could you give like the community stuff that's coming up the Lower East Side? When the next what is it of awareness? The
Day of Awareness.
If there's another one coming up, like give those out so the community can actually reach out.
So. So for this Day of Awareness, we may be just doing it annually. So it may come around the same time next year, right? So next year, pertaining to the next. So each board meeting is held on the second Wednesday of every month. The one that's going to be taking place in Lower East Side is going to be the second Wednesday of November, and there's going to be an in-house board meeting taking place in October, the second Wednesday of October.
Do you know where the in-house is going to be?
Yeah, it's going to be at 100 Church Street at our main headquarters, and that's on the 10th floor.
Okay, so the second Wednesday of October, looking at the calendar, this Wednesday is the first Wednesday. The second Wednesday will be October 9th.
Yes.
And then the second Wednesday of November will be November 13th.
Yes.
Just to add on to you, so the dates.
Yeah,
so
that'll
people know how to get out there.
And that'll be at 80 Pitt Street.
To know your rights, for sure.
And to like, we accept all forms of critique, comments. There's a section at the end of the board meeting that general members of the public can come and tell us what they think of the CCRB, what they think about policing in their community. This is your ability to have your voice heard by the same board members that we mentioned earlier today are appointed by the mayor, the city council, and the police commissioner. So if you have an opinion about policing, we are trying to fill those rooms with community members that care. So that being the case, come and have the conversation. Otherwise,
get involved.
Please, yes, absolutely. Please, we our job, in addition to giving information out to the public, is making the public feel very comfortable giving us their feedback. The information that we come up with, the information and recommendations that are made are not out of a vacuum, right? So we don't come up with them out of thin air. They come from members of the public being involved and having the conversation with us.
Well, it also speaks to the point that DNA made earlier about the people in the community actually sitting down and speaking to the senators and the councilmen and all those people. And also, so this also leads to, like, you know, it goes even far back as like people going to the PTA meetings in public school, right? So it's all about like getting involved. So this information that, you know, that you're giving is beautiful for people to get involved. So it's kind of like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? Exactly. But as long as the information is getting out there and just, you know, speaking out to DNA Radio, you know, you guys need to definitely get involved and take advantage of these things, because then, you know, if you want change, you got to be the change to make change happen.
Okay, on that note, it's top of the hour, and we're a union shop here, so we have to wrap it up. Could you just give your name and title, and we're going to close it up?
Okay, first name Jahai, Jahi. Last name Rose, like the flower, Rose. I am the Deputy Director of Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
All right.
Let's hear it for Mr. Rose. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
Not a problem. I appreciate you guys too. That was an awesome conversation.
We're still on social media though. Be careful what you say.
All right.
I'm gonna take care.
Right.
So if you turn off the mics, will we still be on social media? So can